Will you be swiping left or right? Hello, students, and welcome to All Lit Up, the podcast about literature. For each episode, my job is to help you better understand and appreciate the material we're studying. I'm your host, David Wilson, and in today's show, we take an in-depth look at Wendy Cope's 1986 poem, Lonely Hearts. You know, no one is immune from loneliness. It afflicts young and old, rich and poor. And statistics show in a place such as Japan that over 500,000 people under the age of 40 haven't left home or interacted with someone in about 6 months. In fact, it may be reaching epidemic proportions globally, especially during the recent pandemic. The medical profession has reported an increase of patients suffering from loneliness. So if you're feeling lonely, the irony is that you're not alone. Here in Canada, 1 in 5 citizens identify as lonely. And just before the pandemic started in 2018, the UK government set up a commission on loneliness and appointed a minister to oversee the findings. Research indicates that about 40% of us say social media actually makes us lonely. We all know that humans need contact. We require company. We like conversation. We need meaningful relationships, whether it's with our family, our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues, and our classmates at work, home, and school. And as we know, isolation is linked to things like depression and anxiety, high blood pressure, and obesity. And you got to keep in mind that loneliness is different from solitude. We all seek solitude. We find that's a place where we can increase our creativity and productivity. We can build our mental strength and our empathy. Solitude is actually good for our mental health. There's been a lot written about this over the years. There's been a biography of loneliness by Faye Albertini. Olivia Laing in 2016 wrote about the lonely city in her book. The whole idea of lonely hearts has been around for centuries. Nathaniel West called his 1933 novel Lonely Hearts. Nat King Cole had an album in 1962 about lonely hearts. Remember the Beatles' great album from 1967? Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It's turned up in episodes for TV shows. It's been in films. It's even been in places like pop culture from the 1940s. There were 2 serial killers in the United States who met their victims through personal ads. And they were called the Lonely Hearts Killers. That's kind of creepy, isn't it? I know that Harvard did a long study focusing on, I think, about 700 or 800 men and trying to find out how they stay healthy and mentally sharp. And apparently it really boils down to one thing. You need good relationships. This is what keeps you happy and healthy. It protects our brain. It preserves our memory. These social connections help us live longer, more meaningful lives. So loneliness can actually kill. If we're isolated too much, our health declines, and we need quality relationships. And that's sort of what Wendy Cope's poem is all about. That search for someone else to share your time with. But as I mentioned, Lonely Hearts as an idea, we can see that turning up probably in Europe in the late 17th, early 18th century. A lot of Lonely Hearts ads were posted by men looking for young, rich women. Some things never change. They were often writing about how they were searching for, good domestic virtues, and delicacy was prized. Some of them got a little risque in their ads in the 18th century. They would say something like they were looking for a shapely ankle. That was preferred, I guess, back then. We also see women writing Lonely Hearts ads, some desperate widows who might have lost a husband or who had a cruel guardian. They were, unfulfilled. Later in the 19th century, some pictures might have turned up. People would have shared their pictures. The Lonely Hearts ads became extremely popular in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s, turning up in weekly newspapers, monthly newspapers. Some of them were scams, escort services, things like that. And you can really feel for these people. You can see the sadness coming out in these ads, the hope and the hilarity of what they're searching for. By the time you get to the 20th century, we see soldiers in World War I ads, looking for love, or people out on the prairies in the western part of Canada, United States, searching for somebody to come and live with them. It's lonely out west, I suppose. So one of the most witty and eccentric collection of Lonely Hearts ads turns up in a magazine, the London Review of Books, in the late 1990s. Look for me to share a few samples of that on the main Noon page. Today, everything's switched from print media, from newspapers and magazines, to online dating services or apps. That's where we see these Lonely Hearts ideas circulating today online. It's, I think, the second biggest online industry for paid content, which is amazing. Which brings us to Wendy Cope's poem, Lonely Hearts. What makes this poem so great? Well, as we know, it's its form, it's its content, and it's something Cope does that makes this poem so unique. She takes this fixed form, the villanelle, from the Middle Ages, and it's hard to write a good villanelle. It's torturous. It's all about craftsmanship and skill, because you've got those first and third lines repeating and being rhymed, kind of like a refrain in a song or a chorus. You've got to have 19 lines, and all that repetition and that strict form risks monotony. The duplication of lines just turns into a trivial literary exercise. You're just seeing if you can write one. So a good villanelle has got to build momentum to a smooth, graceful closing in that final quatrain where you sort of tie it up. So got to be systematic, got to be methodical, and you got to be creative too. So the content of villanelles traditionally would have focused on the traditions of courtly love. So it's connected to the pastoral tradition, unrequited love, the yearning and desire, the kind of obsession that somebody would have had, all the emotions pouring out of them on the page. And Cope is certainly drawing on that as well with the content, and she's got the form down pat with the villanelle. So she knows what she's doing here, and what she does is she mashes things together. She takes that old form that's centuries old, and she makes a modern twist or a modern take on the search for love and excitement that would be in personal ads from the 1980s and the 1990s. So these villanelles have been around since the 13th or 14th century, and Cope makes it new here. And the villanelle had a real renaissance or second life in the 1980s and 90s. People sort of rediscovered them and thought they were quite intriguing and clever. So make sure that you read those notes on the villanelle. Make sure that you read Wendy Cope's wonderful poem, Lonely Hearts, with its 6 different voices and the different tones that might be at work there. Is she being sincere? Is this a sarcastic sort of parody or satire? You'll have to decide what's going on here, and then you could do a posting on it. And thanks for joining me on this episode of All Lit Up. And if you've got any questions, please review the module notes or send me an email. And remember that when we read a good story or a poem, they can actually show us that we're not alone and being lonely. Next time. See you online.